Welcome to another Thursday with ThirdPath webinar. For those of you who are joining for the first time, ThirdPath Institute is a national nonprofit getting ready to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And since we were founded, we've been showing people how to do work, family, and leadership differently. In fact, it's that time of year when we share some of our knowledge through this amazing Overwhelm mitigation groups that we run. Would you like to learn how to do this integrated approach, learn how to develop some key integration skills, work more effectively, and find more time for life? Well, check out our 12 call series, the Overwhelm mitigation groups, on our website. You'll see it's a great way to meet a group of peers who are trying to do the same thing and learn together around how to push back at overwhelm and live a more satisfying life. In the meantime, we're glad you're here today. And as you know, we've been looking at Anne-Marie Slaughter's Mandates for Change all year long. And this call in particular, we're talking about how in order to really make change, we need to make it a men's and women's issue. If we really want to become an innovation nation, these topics have become equally important to men and women. And there's no better person to have a conversation like that than with Matt Schneider. Matt is the co-founder of City Dads Group, and I'm very pleased to say a ThirdPath board member. He's really been pushing the envelope on really including men in this conversation and promoting a new way of thinking about modern fatherhood. Matt, we're so glad you're here today. Tell us a little about the journey you've been on and why it's so important to include men in the conversation about work-life balance, work-life integration. Tell us what you think. Welcome.
Thank you, Jessica, for all of the work that you've done. It really has inspired the work we've been trying to do with City Dads Group. I've been an at-home dad for 14 years in a couple weeks. But one thing I recognize is that didn't make me a better dad than the guys that were working full-time, that had full-time careers. But I didn't see any opportunity, any resources for men around balancing work and life. And I just think these are already men's and women's issues, and it's time for workplaces to recognize that. It's time for publications to recognize that. And it's time for men and women to work together. Men want to succeed at work and at home. We're struggling to balance a successful career with being the dads and partners that we want to be. Women have been connecting and creating communities and supporting each other for decades, and men have a lot to learn. And I think we're ready. We're ready to learn. The New York Times just produced a wonderful guide called The Working Woman's Handbook with contributions from a diversity of women on a diversity of issues. And some are specific to women, like dealing with sexual harassment in the workplace or advocating for fair pay. And of course, we should be talking about those issues that are still problematic, especially for women. But other issues are universal. How to take leave at the birth of a child or when you need to take care of a family. The whole host of issues, or trying to figure out a flexible schedule. Women are calling us out in these kinds of articles, in these kinds of guides, but we also need to recognize that men haven't been working on this for that long. Women have been working for decades trying to figure this all out, how to make their home life what they want it to be and how making their work life what they want it to be. And men are just beginning to think about these issues. And I think we're ready to really work on it. And women are really going to be our best source of knowledge, of learning from their experience and being inspired by women and how they are making it work. And that's why I love ThirdPath. It's bringing women and men together to inspire each other and to work together on these issues.
Amen. Amen. A woman. Absolutely. I mean, I really, 20 years ago, knew that if we just made this a women's issue, we would never, ever make change. And, you know, in some ways, what's happened around men has been the most hopeful for me. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in today's webinar, because you represent City Dads Group, and There's a couple other dads on today's call who represent other men's groups across the country that are really creating exactly what you're talking about, a space for dads to think in a new way about what does modern fatherhood look like. So hang in there today. Listeners, we're going to be talking about some really important things, but what's fun about today's call, not only is it our 9th annual Father's Day call, all the way through, the issues you're going to be hearing about are going to be spoken from the dads, but you're going to sound so familiar because it turns out so many of these issues really are very similar for moms and dads. So, one of the things we've been looking at this year is this concept of making the impossible possible. Because really where the push comes is if you're serious about your career and you want to move ahead at work, but you also want to have time for family, things can become problematic. And that's where we still haven't seen as much change in the last year. But we feel like we've really hit the nail on the head about what needs to happen to make this change. One, you need to look at how can work be done differently so you have time for work and your lives outside of work, and that's what we're going to look at today. We've got some great stories to illustrate that. Number two, you need to really make it a men's and women's issue. So if we're going to support people to move ahead in their careers, and we really see that they come as whole people with responsibilities outside of work, and it's true for men and women, that's going to really allow for this change in how we approach careers and success at work. And number three, we really need to find some leaders who are role modeling it differently. And I bet we'll talk about that today too. So we really think those are, three key things to make the impossible possible. But in particular today, we're going to talk about how this plays out when you're trying to balance work and family, and see some stories around how a few different dads handled it differently around the new family stage. That can be a place where things get stuck in patterns where people are not so happy. And over time, parents can get frustrated because one's doing more flexing than they planned, or both don't feel like they have enough time for family. And so we're going to be really looking at how can we think differently across the life cycle, starting with the new family stage. Matt, I'm going to put one more slide up, and this is the one where I want you to get your thoughts on, which is one thing we've learned over the last 20 years is that there really are different ways people want to do family. And it's not that there's right or wrong, they're just differences. You happen to be a stay-at-home dad. Parental care was important for you. Other families probably solved it very differently when they had a new person at home that they were trying to care for. And what we're really trying to say at ThirdPath is there's not one right way to do it. Instead, we really want to support a diversity of families, but because of some norms at work and norms at home, we can get into trouble around this. I know that's something you do at City Dads. You really try to be inclusive of diversity of families. What have you learned about how different families want different things? How has this played out for some of the dads that you've worked with?
I think we are in this wonderful time when men and women are unbound by the gender norms of the past. Those automatic man works, woman stays home are largely gone in a lot of the worlds we all live in. They're still holding on in other places, but I really think that men and women, fathers and mothers, or fathers in families, mothers in families, really are able to think about what is going to work for their family, what work situation is going to work for their family, what childcare situation is going to work for their family. So that starting point that I think people are coming into as they are thinking about having children and having children really opens their minds to something new that even 10 years ago, I don't think many people were thinking about. How do we structure our lives and think about both men and women flexing? And I know, Jessica, you and ThirdPath have been thinking about these things for a long time, but I feel like the message is getting louder and louder across communities that men and women need to be working this together. And every solution, like you said, is going to be different. There are a ton of gay dads in our across city dads group, and we have a ton to learn from them, because they certainly aren't bound by any sort of gender norms. They're trailblazers in figuring out in parenthood and navigating between work and life. We have, of course, a lot of at-home dads trying to figure out kind of their trajectory. It's still not necessarily welcomed by society to have a man not working. So navigating those issues is still a challenge. But if you and your partner are on the same page, then you have a lot better chance. So
Yeah.
I could go on. I mean,
Yep.
like I said, we have now almost 15,000 members across the country, and every single one of their stories is different, and every
Yes.
one is something we can learn from.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the beauty of it. That's really been the sea change, is that there really are men out there doing things very differently, and they're doing it in partnership with the other parent at home. That's going to be the best outcome, because they're really on the same page and thinking about it. However, I know, having gone to different events, either through you guys or Dad 2.0 or the National At Home Dads Network, there's also some single parent dads out there doing amazing things, really showing that, whether you have another parent involved or not, there really are some different opportunities around how to think about these issues. However, what we're trying to look at is the big picture today, and we're going to look at some kind of patterns around families as a way to start getting an understanding of the big picture. For those of you who've been listening into the webinars this year, you've probably seen this slide before. We've been using batteries all year to talk about how we can balance work and life. And so we have blue means that someone's working, yellow means that they're doing family work, green means they have recharge time. And we've been thinking about how in different family situations, some families set it up in the more traditional or reverse traditional. In Matt's case, he was a stay-at-home parent. His wife worked full-time. Then you can have a one-parent flex family where one of the parents actually gets pretty good at setting a boundary. That's what the big black line is around that parent, so they can do work and family. And then there's some people who both go back to full-time work, and really are trying to continue following their careers using full-time childcare as a way to make it all work. And as many of you know, ThirdPath in particular has been trying to help people think about this different model, this model we call shared care, where both parents can think about how they set some boundaries around work. Both parents learn how to share their responsibilities at home. And the interesting thing about that model is, over time, kids grow up. And so many are working full-time flexible schedules once their kids are in preschool or school age. Why I put this picture up is because this concept of setting boundaries turns out to be a lot more complicated than when I first thought about back, when I started ThirdPath. So we're going to talk a little bit about this picture in a second, Matt. Because what I've been learning is, when you're that person trying to set boundaries at work, in this case, there's a picture of a battery that's got that black line around it. You're in the middle of a bunch of batteries where people aren't setting limits. They're just putting work first. It's hard. So when you're that person at that workplace who's saying, you know what, I want to have time for my family. I want to have time to recharge on the weekends. I want to set up my life where I do work excellently, but I have time and energy for all these other things too. There's some challenges they face. Certainly something I think I was slow to pick up on, because it just seems so logical to approach work differently. But the truth is, the culture of many organizations are a little resistant to that. Have you seen that as an issue that some of the dads that you work with across the country are experiencing, and how does that play out for them?
Absolutely. I think we all know that there's a penalty when a woman becomes a mother in the workplace, and men are given a bonus, for lack of a better term, when they become fathers. They become more stable, they become more reliable, and Boston College study many years ago said they actually work more hours. The expectation is that men are more committed as employees because they need that job. They may be the primary caregiver for that family. And that, I think, is true. I think there are a lot of men who are in that position. There are a lot of women in that position as well. But I do think workplaces are finally welcoming men into the conversations to talk about these work-life issues and helping men recognize and realize that there's a way to be the best or be good at their careers, still continue to pursue good work and be good employees, but also recognize that they have a life outside of work and be the dads that they want to be. I think paternity leave is the beginning of the discussion. I'm guessing everyone on the call knows that paternity leave is becoming a big issue that everybody is talking about now. Nobody 10 years ago was talking about paid paternity leave and men taking time from the office. The average number of days that men were taking from work was 2 or something like that. And now we're talking about workplaces that have 16 weeks of paternity leave, 12 weeks, 8 weeks. And that to me is huge change in a short amount of time. We do a lot of work with Dove Men Plus Care, and the parent company is Unilever. Lance, my City Dads Group co-founder, and I moderated a panel at one of Unilever's offices a couple weeks ago with dads at Unilever that had taken paternity leave. They were on stage with an audience of men and women talking about their paternity leave experience, how important it was for them to be at home, how they prepared to take that time off, what they did during that time off, and how they came back to the workplace. And it was profound for men and women to hear some senior level employees talking about taking leave and really being loud about the fact that they were taking leave. So I think there's a real opportunity right now with where we are in the conversation that men and women can talk about these things together.
Yeah, and again, such a great example. I mean, paternity leave or any kind of leave is a great example of boundary setting. You're saying, I'm trying to step away from work and actually acclimate to being a new parent. And then you come back to work, and that's what we're going to be talking about today on the call too, is what does it look like when we come back to work? How do we make it all work? Here's what I think is happening. The story behind this is that men, again, outdated norms. This doesn't happen. In fact, when you listen to today's call, you're going to hear that there's people doing it very, very differently. But what's happening is there's some assumptions about what men are supposed to do and some assumptions about people who are serious about what their careers are supposed to do. And that creates this kind of double bind for dads because it typically plays out in this gendered way. So you said, the assumption is when a dad becomes a parent, he'll work more hours. He'll be more serious about his job because that's what, men are supposed to focus on work, move ahead at work. And they get kind of stuck in that pattern, the larger cultural assumptions, both around what men do and what people who are serious about their careers do. And so again, what ThirdPath had to learn was if we really want to make change, we've got to include men, but we also have to start thinking differently about careers. There's an assumption that you can't set boundaries and move ahead. And, what we've learned is the truth. It's actually hard to be the person setting boundaries if it's not encouraged. And so what that means is that people at the top of the organizations really have always become very work focused. And they perpetuate that pattern probably around who they hire and who they promote. And so there's some real strong norms at our workplaces that get in the way of people. Yep, they've had the baby. Yep, they've had leave. Now they're actually trying to have some time with their family. There's some real strong norms that's just not going to be okay. Here's how it also plays out. And I'm moving through these quickly because I want to make sure we get to some stories too. It can play out around money. So if you're in that family where somebody's setting boundaries, that one parent or both parents, like in a shared care family, there's more risk involved. And so I think what we've learned over the last 20 years is asking parents to do things differently, to think differently about work so they have time for their lives is not as easy as I thought. There's some risk involved. Good news, you're going to hear some dads who are really doing it differently in a second. What advice do you have, Matt, to people who are trying to do it differently? There's some career risk, there's some possible income risk. What have you learned from dads who are trying to do it differently and, pushing back at this risk and uncertainty?
These are my favorite people in the world. I love to hear people who are trying to make this work because this is the opportunity to really create the life that you want to lead. And I mean, the tagline of ThirdPath is it, because
Yeah.
it takes tremendous communication. You really need to be on the same page about all the third path issues that we talk about. Finances. You can't go out and buy the house in the big house in the best suburb and drive the fanciest car and go on the best vacations and expect to be able to do something like this. You really need to be thinking about um, all these different pieces of the puzzle that are going to make this work. And we're still learning from these families, and I think there's variations of these families, and we're all on kind of a different spectrum. But I think if we can show the world the benefits of how this works, and I know that's Third Path's mission is to keep telling these stories. I think people get inspired, and they again open their minds to something new. And I do think that this is going to become much more the norm, because when you have two people who are on career paths, most people need to have two incomes. They don't want the risk of having only one income. They both want to stay engaged with their careers. Women are certainly told, don't leave the workforce for too long, otherwise you won't be able to get back in. Certainly that's the case for men as well. So being able to find a path that you can be the parent you want to be the career person that you want to be, I think is the model that we're all going to be looking to.
Yeah, and again, it was interesting. There's so much that's predictable. What happens when the baby's born or the second child's born? What happens around school age care? And unfortunately, then we've learned there's also some unpredictable around what happens around elder care or care of others that are hitting some health issues as you get a little further along in your career. But for the most part, these are skills we can learn. These are things we can plan around. And what we've seen over and over again is when couples do get on the same page, they can really figure out how to create much more flexible, changing, desirable solutions that meet both parents' needs. And if they don't, they can really get stuck in patterns. The demands of time, the assumptions around money and gender can keep parents really kind of locked into patterns that aren't working for either one. So we're going to get into some stories about how some of these families have been thinking differently. What I wanted to talk about really quickly was this concept of how do you help couples get on the same page? What gets in the way of people getting on the same page? So Matt, I'm going to describe this little picture to you, get your thoughts on it. In particular, we also want to talk about, getting on the same page, not just around sharing care of children, but getting on the same page of handling the other household responsibilities. So when I thought about how to talk about this today, I said, you know what? I think overwork is still the biggest problem of families getting on the same page. Either one parent's overworked and coming home exhausted and the other one's frustrated, or both parents are overworked and nobody has time and energy to think about that. And when either of those situations happen, it can really cause trouble for families. In fact, there's a great article by Claire Kane Miller talking about this exact issue. But let's pretend that they can push back at overwork and they are really get dedicated to having some time for family. There are still some cultural what are men supposed to do? What are women supposed to do? What are mothers supposed to do? What are fathers supposed to do? What's the ideal worker supposed to do? What kind of house are we supposed to live in? Those kind of cultural norms can get in the way. But let's say you're willing to really think differently, push back, try things differently. Couples can get stuck because they have different goals. Maybe one wants to use more childcare than the other. Whatever, there can be different goals that get stuck. Here's the one that I wanted to get to though. If couples are trying to think differently, they've been trying to set boundaries around work, they've been trying to think outside the box around cultural norms, they've got the same goals, but they're still getting stuck because one parent's more clear and able to do it than the other parent, I think what can happen is a person can lose hope. And you're trying to do this differently. You've had some conversations with your partner about how to do it differently, but you're still stuck. And that's the place where I want to talk more about today. I think we need to really reach out and have lots of support. And that's probably where City Dads Group comes in. We need resource in our lives to think differently, people to talk to, not lose hope, keep on reaching for our dreams. And if we can get over all those barriers, then I think we really will have success creating a different kind of solution around work and family that meets our needs, meets the other parents' needs, meets the kids' needs. What do you think about this visual? Does it capture some of the roadblocks you've heard dads encounter as they're trying to reach for their particular goals around work and family?
Absolutely. And we just launched, or we're launching a podcast today with a dad, Jonathan Oliver, that I met for the first time at the Dad 2.0 Summit. He wrote an article about his marriage on our website, and he talked on our podcast about the partnership that he is continuing to work on with his wife, and how much work that takes and how much communication that takes. They have weekly staff meetings. They call them staff meetings.
Oh, interesting.
Just the two of them, they're staff meetings, and they're checking in with each other, and they have an agenda, a consistent agenda, checking in with each other, both on the work front and on the home front, and constantly making adjustments along the way. And he talks about on the podcast that he and his wife are thinking about reaching out to their friends and people in their community, other couples, and trying to share this story and share these tools, because they're hearing, like all of us, about couples who have lost hope and are getting divorced. I can't tell you how many at-home dad caregiving or primary breadwinning mom couples I'm starting to hear about that have lost hope and are not able to navigate the cultural norms that you reference on this slide.
Yeah.
Absolutely, connecting with other people and learning from each other is our best chance.
Yeah. So again, with the goal of getting to our stories quickly, a big message I think you'll hear all the way through is, in a two-parent family, getting on the same page around what your goals are for work and family will really help you deal with the fact that we're still in a world that's not super supportive of some of these ideas. But if you and your partner are clear about what you both want, it will help you continue to reach for those goals and getting some support around it. And here's the support that's out there. Matt's got this amazing group, City Dads Group. There's also the National At-Home Dads Network, Dad 2.0. There's lots of resources out for if you're a dad listening in today, or a mom who's married to a dad. There's a lot of resources out there for you to find support and learn how to think differently around these issues. So we want to get into some stories. Marlon is a pretty amazing story around thinking differently, both around work and family. And, in order to make this work today, what I did was interview Marlon for today's webinar, because he's actually working from Portugal right now. And so it was going to be hard from a time point of view to get him on today's webinar. But we're going to start with Marlon's story really quickly about dads and moms and dads thinking differently about work and family. So I'm going to tell you really quickly about Marlon's story. And then afterwards, we're going to hear from Austin. Austin's a stay-at-home dad who also, is now dealing with that truth. His kids are older, and so they're both going to be in kind of the school schedule, and that means he's got some time to think differently about work and family. We're also going to hear from Michael Anderson Levy. He's a two-dad parent, and he's got a great story about really thinking in new ways around what he wants around work and family as well. So you're going to hear some great stories. I'm going to quickly talk about Marlon's And then we're going to have Whit Honey talk about some of what we learned today. Whit's going to be helping us write a book about all this stuff, so we're really excited to have Whit on the call today as well. Very briefly, what I wanted to share about Marlon's story is that actually his journey began because he and his wife both noticed that they were dealing with some health issues because of the stress of their jobs. So even before they had their baby, they realized they needed to make a change. Work was important, but so was living a really joyful and healthy life. And so they really made some changes. Marlon in particular started to work in a remote way for his workplace and discovered by working remotely, he had more time to do some things that would take care of him, like regular time for exercise, less time spent commuting, less time spent in meetings that were going nowhere. So he learned even before the baby was born how working remotely was going to be a really good solution. He also realized, hey, I need to work for an organization that has good parental leave. So he changed to another organization that had better parental leave before the baby was there. And kept on thinking to himself, look, I want to do work in a way where I'm effective at work, but I have time for my family. Fast forward to today, they are now set again, continuing to share things. Both Marlon and his wife work, but in a flexible way. At this point in Marlon's career, he works very early in the morning, 6 a.m., and then ends his workday at 12 or 1, so he can hang out with his daughter in the afternoons. And so his wife also does a flexible schedule, and together they've really learned how to flex their jobs and share taking care of their daughter. It really was fun to hear how Marlon came from a place of wanting better health, and all those skills he learned could be applied to a happier, more joyful family. All right, last but not least, I asked Marlon, hey, have you learned how to figure out how to share what the home responsibilities are, cooking, cleaning, laundry, all that stuff? And he had a good story to tell. He said this was something he had to learn more about. He came from a cultural background where men really weren't supposed to do those kinds of things. And it was some untraining that he had to learn about how to get past those norms and become more of a supportive partner around household responsibilities. I asked him, well, where did that change start? Did you start it? Did your wife start it? Where did it start? And he says about a few months into when they had their baby, they both saw that his wife was getting really exhausted. And so they both had to learn how to do it differently. He needed to step up more and offer and be part of the team. And she needed to let go and include him in the process. It's still a journey. They're still learning together, but he feels like he's really, really learned a lot about how to be a true partner, both with children and the home responsibilities. And she's gotten more open to the idea of bringing in help, not just Marlon's, but actually hiring somebody to help out, for example, with cleaning and laundry. So it's been fun to see that they really are on a journey together, learning together around this stuff. Austin, you have been on a journey too. I know actually today you're, have a child who's homesick. So hopefully you're here right at this moment. Let me check that you just check in. I can hear your voice. Austin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. He's up
Okay,
and on the
good.
couch watching the Lego movie, so.
Okay, good. You've been on a journey too. So you were a stay-at-home dad. Now you're looking at the fact that your kids are old enough that you could start work again. Tell us a little bit about how you've made this work, and most importantly, when you think ahead, what will help you with this next leg of your life? What will help you make this transition happen?
Yeah, been a stay-at-home dad for 9 years, and my wife works in kind of corporate IT tech world. She does security, so her job is fairly rigid, and so our plan has always been to make sure that whatever happens, that I stay fairly flexible, so we can kind of prioritize the kids. So while her job may not allow for her to take off whenever she wants, we at least have one of us home for that to happen. And so moving forward, when it came to going back to work, my youngest is going to be in kindergarten starting in August. We decided we wanted to make sure that whatever happened, that I would still be there when they got out of school, and that my priority would be with them. So my background's photography, and so we just figured, why don't I just start freelancing, start my own little business here, and then I can pick up jobs as I need, and as I can fill them in my schedule, and then make sure that, you know, first on the schedule is what they need and what my kids need. So it's been enlightening. It's nice not having to stick to that 9 to 5 grind.
Yeah. And actually, I think, Austin, you're probably describing a very classic truth that one parent creates a more of a entrepreneurial approach to work as a way to adopt that and find that flexibility around family. So, you know, I think Matt's listening to your story going, that's exactly what I did. Kind of started a business. Look what it grew to. So you never know, Austin, that you're launching something. We'll see where it takes you. What I loved when I heard your story before, I've heard your story a couple of times, is how much you guys have been such a team for each other. How have you supported each other around finding recharge time? I think you had some good stories around making sure you, for example, had time for yoga one day. How have you helped each other around recharge time?
Um, I think it's easier when you kind of see what happens when you don't.
Yeah,
Um, you know, when the kids were little, we never prioritized ourselves that much, and because of that, you could tell we were feeling burnt out as parents, we were feeling burnt out as partners, and so it became important to make sure that, you know, if she needs time off, that she just lets me know, like I need to go take, like last night she went out with a girlfriend of hers, and they just went to dinner and came back home, but it was time that she needed away from the family and away from the kids, that could just be for her, that she could do something to talk about other than work and kids.
yep,
You know, I do the same thing for yoga. I would get up in the early morning and go in and work out, and at the time I was much more of a morning person, so that worked out really well. It was great to just like wake up. I'm kind of introverted, so you get out on the road and there's nobody out there. It's awesome. And then you walk and you can hear the birds waking up in the morning and there's nobody around. It's awesome.
yeah.
And then you go to yoga and nobody talks to each other, which is like the best way I like to do yoga. And you know, we still
Wonderful.
do that a lot. Like when we have time, even like a week or so ago, my wife went out of town for training for a few days, and I kind of took that opportunity to be like, this is my time to have by myself. So when the kids went down, I sat up and watched like all the old campy 80 movies that had been on our wish list forever, because like that's what I want to do and nobody wants to do that with me. So, you know, I was able to make time for myself while also being the primary parent.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And how about, cooking, laundry? Have you guys figured out some tips around how you make that all work in your household? What's worked well? Is there any places that you're still figuring out?
Yeah, it's mostly we're still trying to figure this out. It feels like we're always behind on that. My my realm has always been in the kitchen, so the cooking and the dishes and everything tend to fall within my realm of responsibility. My wife has been the one to kind of take care of laundry, which is a little easier since it doesn't stick to like hard times like meals do.
Yeah,
Um, and then we've kind of realized in the last year or so that as she progresses through her career and, you know, her pay increases, and her responsibilities increase at work, it's easier for us to find somebody that can do that for us. So she recently reviewed really well at work and got a nice pay bump, and we decided, you know, what we would do with that, instead of taking away responsibilities at work because she's doing so well, that what we better off doing is using that extra money each month to have somebody come in and clean the house and do the things that we don't have times to do, like dusting the fans, or scrubbing down the walls in the bathroom, which with 2 little kids you have to do way more than we thought we would. Um, and that gives us more quality time at home. And what it ends up, you know, is like what we figure out is it only takes a couple hours of her work at her job that gives us much more hours at home, that we can spend
right.
quality time with the kids.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's actually something that we've really learned is that it's not like shared care doesn't mean that you don't have some other people coming in or a team at home. The team includes some other people helping us make it all work. So wonderful. Uh, one advice you have for dads from the journey that you've experienced. Some advice one piece of advice you have for dads when they're listening in today about what's important around these issues.
Sorry, could you
What's
repeat
advice?
that? I had one kid screaming up at the stairs for me.
What's one last piece of advice you have for dads as they're trying to think about all these things?
I've always told dads that I kind of meet that the one nice thing about being a dad, especially when you're a stay-at-home dad or you're kind of the primary caregiver, is there really is no rule book. There's no playbook for how you should do it. I see a lot of moms that kind of struggle to to parent the way they see other moms, maybe on social media or within their own communities that seem to be doing it so well. And I don't feel like there's a ton of stuff out there for dads, which is a great thing because you kind of get to forge your own path and figure out what works best for me and my family. I've never really felt pressure for like how I should parent, as long as I'm doing a good job, which, you know, my kids are happy and healthy. So I would assume at this point I've done an okay job. But I don't have to worry about, you know, does their lunch look as pretty as the other kids' lunches? Does their birthday cake look as good as it should? Is my house spotless? Because I've been to other houses and I've seen what other parents do, and I know that like if I don't put pressure on myself, I don't have to worry about it. There's no rule book for me that I have to follow. Like I said, as long as they're happy and healthy, that's about all I can ask for.
Yeah, it actually sounds like very good advice for moms too, quite frankly, Austin. So thank you. But I really hear you loud and clear because you're doing something so unique, so different still, unfortunately. Hopefully it's going to become more normal. You don't have to kind of follow that rule book of what good moms are supposed to do. You can just be the dad you want to be. That's great. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Hey, so we're going to hear from Michael. I encourage Michael to think a little bit about what did you want to talk about your story, Michael? And you know, you've been on a journey. It's a fairly new journey. Tell us what you've been learning on this journey as a new dad. What have you been learning, Michael?
Great. Thanks, Jessica. And it's hard to believe it's been a year since I first met you and Matt at the Dove Men Plus Care event here in New York. And I just want to first and foremost say thank you for the opportunity for me to share my story with the group today. And so my husband, Matt, and I are a same-sex household. Matt is an anesthesiologist, and I'm a vice president, human resources at American Express. So kind of going back to some of the content earlier. So we're definitely a two-parent family with equal careers with full-time daycare. And so that's where Cole spends most of his time Monday through Friday. Just a little history on Matt and I. So we actually met at a gay ice hockey tournament here in the New York City area back in 2012. We were married in August of 2016. And very early on in our relationship, we spoke openly about our respective desires to have kids and become fathers. And so to do that, we chose the surrogacy path to fatherhood. And after 3+ years, which included many emotional highs and lows along the way, you know, we finally realized our dream of becoming fathers on January 31st of 2018, when our son came. Sorry, I'm getting choked up a little bit. When our son Cole came into the world and forever changed our lives. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also call it the fact that we also have 2 dogs, Hayden and Cooper, and a cat, JJ. So it's not just the 3 of us who you're seeing in the picture that make up our household. And so, as you mentioned a few moments ago, so I'm fairly new into the fatherhood journey, 16 months in, and I also think it's important to share that I'm doing this later in life as I turned 50 last September, right? So I want to talk a little bit in the next couple of minutes about kind of the paternity leave and care and stuff in the early days. And so my husband, Matt, only received 1 day off for the birth of Cole. However, he managed to compile his PTO days, conference days, dependent care days to allow him to take 6 weeks off of work after Cole was born. I was in the opposite end of the spectrum, being blessed to work for a company like American Express, who was a leader in the space. And I took 20 weeks of paid paternity leave. And I'd say I've certainly, from an internal corporate perspective, encourage other expecting fathers at American Express. And I've got one on my team who came in today with his daughter, and he is just wrapping up his 20 weeks of paternity leave and coming back in a couple of weeks. So as a 2-dad family, we were able to share those responsibilities, both of giving Cole his bottle, as neither of us were breastfeeding. So I'd say that's one of the benefits of a 2-dad family. You can share in that.
Yeah.
We also shared the getting up in the middle of the night when he was hungry, needed a diaper change, or even just wanted to be held until he fell back to sleep. And so I think through those early days, we were lucky in that we were both able to get a fair amount of rest throughout the day overnight. And I'd say it was awesome to have 6 weeks together to figure everything out versus one of us having to do it on their own. I'd say, you know, our first transition point in our journey was after that 6 weeks when Matt returned to work. That's when things shifted, and I now had that responsibility of getting up in the middle of the night to feed and comfort Cole. You know, I also had the responsibility of taking care of him during the day when Matt was at work, and then Matt took on responsibility for walking the dogs in the morning before he headed out. We did a handoff of sorts in the afternoon when Matt got home so I could have a break, and that break meant either I could choose to go to the gym, potentially take a nap, or even doing the dishes or laundry. Matt took care of bath time with Cole and also the nighttime feeding so that he had some extra time with Cole in the evening. And then I took responsibility for doing that last walk of the day with the dogs. And we, of course, we've got a dog walker who took care of the dogs during the day then and still do so now. I'd say our next and my next transition point in this journey was when I returned to work last July. So Matt's work, given he's an anesthesiologist, his work day normally starts around 6 a.m., which means he's out the door by 5. We knew and agreed early on, right, that I would be the one responsible for getting Cole fed and dressed in the morning, in addition to figuring out how am I going to get myself together. I would have the responsibility for doing the drop-off at school before I headed into the office. And so we started preparing for my return to work about a year or so ago now, as Cole transitioned to daycare and went to school 3 days a week, which allowed both he and I to get acclimated to what was going to become our new schedule. Honestly, since I returned to work last July, I often tell others that my day starts and ends in the most amazing way, and that's because of the time I have with Cole in the morning and the evening. Then there's all this other stuff that happens during the hours in between, which we call work. And I'd say for the most part of my adult life, right, I've been with American Express for 27 years, right? I've tied my identity to my time here at American Express and my career. But I'm proud to say that I have a new identity as Cole's dad, and one which is much more rewarding and always brings a smile to my face, and obviously at times stirs up emotions inside when I talk about it. But by far, without a doubt, being a dad is the best job I've ever had. The other thing I do want to call out, right, is say that the transition back to work last year was harder than I imagined, and it's certainly been a struggle at times over the last year, trying to balance the demands of my job with taking care of Cole while also being a husband and having time for Matt. I certainly felt, without question, supported by my leaders and my organization while I was out. But I'd say, honestly, since I returned, I've not always felt that same level of support. I think gender has a part to play. I think as stereotypes continue to exist on who plays the role of primary and secondary caregiver, who has those responsibilities for morning drop-off or evening pickup at school. And I'd say historically, women have been seen as the primary caregiver over men, right? And that's not the case in our two-dad family. And in our family, it really comes down to which one of us, and in this case it's me, has more flexibility in their job. So during my time while I was out last year on paternity leave, I had plenty of quiet time at home with Cole while I was napping in my arms. And so, I mentioned earlier, I've been with American Express for pretty much my entire career. And while I was out, I had the opportunity to reflect on where I am. Right. And one of the things I came to the conclusion and made the decision that I shared with Matt that I didn't want to be doing what I'm doing 10 years from now. And honestly, quite frankly, most likely not 5 years from now. One of the things that I've been blessed with and I'm taking advantage of is earlier this year, I started working with an executive coach. Right. And one of the first assignments he gave to me was to complete what he called the Odyssey exercise, where I wrote out 3 different career paths. Right. So for me, the first one was easy, which was pretty much stay in my current role and continue my drive to become a high-performing VP. The second was also easy, and it's my dream job, which would be to retire from American Express and become a stay-at-home dad like Matt Schneider. Right. The third one I'd say has been the one that's proven most challenging. Right, which there's most likely a third path or some other path in between, which could include a phased retirement from American Express and a transition to a full-time stay-at-home dad, or potentially something else in between, which I don't know. Right. The great news is I don't need to have all the answers today, but now that I've connected to a group of like-minded leaders who are also trying to figure this out, I'm optimistic that I too in time will figure out what's next for me. So another couple of things in terms of our journey as fathers. So Matt and I are planning to start a sibling journey next year. Right. So as we look forward to becoming a two-dad family with 2 kids, we're trying to figure out if we want to continue to live and work in the New York, New Jersey area, or if we want to relocate. Right. And so we've been talking about and considering relocating to Phoenix potentially next summer, mostly since American Express has a large presence there. And then Matt would also be able to transfer to a similar position at a local hospital with his current employer. Right. Next week, I'm actually taking a business trip to Phoenix. And so while I'm there, I'm actually going to visit the Bright Horizons in downtown. Cole currently goes to Bright Horizons here locally because I know most daycares or schools have waiting lists, right? So
Right.
we're potentially a year out, right, from doing that relocation, and so it's certainly not too soon to figure out what that process would be to potentially find new care for Cole if we do the relocation. As a family perspective, we're doing a trip over Labor Day weekend, mostly so Matt can get a better idea if it's a place where he would like to live and work and is ultimately right for our family, dogs and cat included. Right? I lived in Phoenix for a few years in the late 90s when I first moved from Canada. And so just kind of as I close up, I want to think back to a couple of those stories. So, it was great to hear, but then also read Marlon's story in the most recent newsletter, right? As I
Yep.
read the newsletter, it's like what Marlon and his wife have successfully done is they went through the process that Matt and I have been figuring out and considering for the past few months. So it's great to hear that folks have done this and done it successfully. And then I also recently read Clara Kane Miller's article about how same-sex couples divide chores and what it reveals about modern parenting. And so, I think I feel good in feeling that Matt and I equally share in the responsibilities of taking care of Cole as well as the dogs and JJ. I'd say we also split up the chores based on our own personal preferences and are based on our strengths. Austin, you're a cook. I'm not a cook, right? My husband Matt is the cook, and I have zero interest or skills on that front, right?
Right.
Matt tackles the financial responsibilities, making sure we're paying all the bills on time. I really enjoy doing laundry for everyone in the household and pulling their Cole's outfits and backup clothes for school. And I'd say on the shopping front, we pretty much do most of that shopping together, certainly at least anything we need for Cole, most times on our way home from school in the night. And so, as I wrap up, I just want to say, I thought life was fast before I became a dad. Certainly these days, life moves at warp speed. And I can't believe that Matt and I are celebrating our second Father's Day this Sunday. So I
Yeah.
certainly want to wish all those fathers who are with us today a happy Father's Day and hope that you enjoy every moment of your special day with your kids.
Yeah, what a good wish. Thank you, Michael. And so much to underscore there. I'm just going to do a couple of highlights of what we've heard from these three different stories, and then get Whit to give a comment or two about some of this stuff. But Michael, what I really hear in your story is how you've started to think really differently about maybe work can be done in a way where we have time for our lives, and to really have that discussion and communication with your partner as you plan and think ahead about where do we want to go? How do we want to make this happen? I love that Odyssey exercise you did, and it clearly has helped you think in new ways around how to think about work and family. And we can really hear from Austin's story that, we can do it all very differently. And then our kids grow up and it gives us new opportunities. So life and work will keep on changing. And that's just the truth of it. And even in Marlon's story, we heard, hey, they got a lot figured out around how to do work differently, and they needed to learn a couple things around how to do household chores differently. But they're a team at home, they're working together, they're going to figure it out. And, just the fact that they keep on learning together means that they will be able to tackle the next change that comes their way because life and work keep on changing. So, Whit, I'm so excited that we're going to be writing a book together. You're an amazing shared care dad. When you listen into some of the dad stories today, what can dads be doing to make more change in this situation so that, 20 years from now, when we're celebrating ThirdPath's 40th anniversary, we feel really proud of the families and workplaces we've created. What can dads do in this process of change, Whit?
Well, thank you, Jessica. And I'd like to echo Michael's Happy Father's Day to everyone.
Yes.
So this is a fairly wide angle take,
Yep.
I'll admit. But to paraphrase Gandhi, as one does, with regard to change, we've got to be it to see it. And it really is that easy. And yet it's harder than it sounds because, being present, play dates in the park, dropping off and picking up from school, extracurricular activities, volunteering on field trips, activities like that, some of which may seem trivial or even a chore. And to your point earlier, Jessica, it's easy to feel like you aren't doing enough, to lose hope. But these actions, they are hopeful. They are moments, and moments add up. We can't discount the small stuff because they're bigger than we think. And of course, many of these things and whatever else it is that we may want to do, they often happen when there are other demands of home, work-related demands, just things that also need to take up our time. And if we have a partner who has the ability and flexibility to work with us, that's great. But they might also have other demands. So getting past our royal, the royal R assumptions about our partner's time and actually working out some sort of schedule and understanding with your partner, what do they want? What are their hopes? And also with work, whether it's leaving early or long lunches or working from home, whatever fix you can find, which is going to be, I think we all know through a lot of trial and error, that's a win for all parties, but especially the kids. Being the change is the big step, and it can generate a ripple effect, inspiring other dads in the process. We need to be seen. We need to talk about it with our partner and our support system if we're fortunate enough to have one. Our work colleagues, other dads in our community, other people who aren't dads. And then don't forget the kids in that conversation. If they're old enough, which is something that everybody decides for themselves, depending on their family and their kids. If they're old enough, include them in that conversation, because we need role models in the workplace, but we also need role models in the home. And some of the big picture change that we want to see is going to come from our kids, and those seeds are planted by them watching us, by watching you. So
yeah. Well said.
That's my thought on that.
Yeah, so great thought, Whit. I love the fact that we really are role modeling to our kids, and the actions we take around these things, the way you guys are being such new kinds of dads, it does have a huge impact. I have a 22-year-old son and a 28-year-old daughter. It's impacted her too. Both, you can see it's influenced who they want to be as they grow up. So the actions we are taking really do have an influence on our kids. I love to be open about it at work and talk about this at work. And I love your point that the small stuff adds up. All those choices we make of being present with our kids really does add up to a very powerful experience for them and for us. It's quite joyful. When we get it right, when we're not feeling exhausted from work, and instead have some time and energy to feel the joy of family, it can feel pretty darn good. So, wow, this time is flying by. There's just never enough time on our Thursday webinars. We really do feel like hopefully what you've heard today is that there are a whole bunch of dads doing it differently, and they're pushing up against really strong norms at workplaces and cultural norms to do this. And as a result, they're feeling like they've really benefited. They have a very wonderful role as a very wonderful modern dad. Matt, I promised you that I was going to give you the last takeaway. As you listened into these stories, as you think about the important work you've been doing with City Dads Group, what other advice do you have for dads about how they can promote more change around this? You might be on mute, Matt, but we want to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. I think the buzzword we've been hearing lately in the press, and Jessica, you referred to it also, the mental load. Sometimes people are now calling it emotional labor. And even as we've been talking today, we think about some of what it takes to be a parent or to run a household is doing the laundry and diaper changes and carpooling. But there's this other invisible work that gets done. Who's making that list of to-dos of everything that we need to do? Who's making the shopping list and monitoring when diapers need to be purchased? And who's planning the carpool and coordinating with other parents? So I think our next work in the ThirdPath community should really be around opening up conversations about that next layer of work and what it takes to really make life work beyond just kind of the to-do list that we can all talk about.
Yeah, and it sounds like if they want a really concrete example of it, tell the listeners again what podcast they can listen into. It sounds like you have a great podcast coming up with a couple talking about that exact thing. What is that, Matt?
Our podcast is called the Modern Dads Podcast, and this week we have Jonathan Oliver talking about his marriage, and he's a dad that was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia fairly late in life. So there's talk about that too. But really, the conversation about his marriage and how the two of them are partnering and figuring out their lives on an ongoing basis is inspiring.
Yeah, great. Yes, to be continued. And again, I think you guys are already on such a great path. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us for today's webinar. We do have a live Q&A coming up next. So those who are on today's webinar, you can ask any of these dads some questions. We have one more dad who's actually going to be partaking in that to share some more of his story, although we're out of time, we'll see. And make sure you check out some of the other great resources that we have available for you on our website. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Stay tuned for the live Q&A.